Welcome to APEC. It's September 25th, and I'm your moderator, Tim Ventura. First, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this call, along with everyone watching us on YouTube. In today's session, Mark Fiorentino will discuss his model of superrelativity. David Perez will join us from QED R&D to discuss the variable electromagnetic drive. Todd Desiato will be talking about spin-stabilized magnetic levitation. And Mark Sokol joins us live from the Interstellar Conference in Tucson with spot interviews for this year's conference presentations and exhibitors. So let me start out with a couple of quick reminders. I want to begin with a giant thank you to Chris Plain from the Debrief for writing Inside the World's Most Exclusive and Strange Anti-Gravity Club. And I'd also like to thank Futurism.com, and I know a couple of other venues have mentioned his article in the conference as well. So Chris, thank you, sir. That was wonderful. And in fact, we're going to try and get Chris on to talk about that article in the near future. Because of that article, we're anticipating a lot of new attendees today, and we've increased our Zoom capacity to squeeze everybody in. You can view conference replays, details, and speaker info on our website at www.altpropulsion.com. So I should mention, please save your questions for the Q&A session after each presenter finishes. You can raise your hand in Zoom using Option +Y on Mac or Alt +Y on Windows. You can also type those questions into chat, and we will go through them after each presenter finishes. So let me introduce you to our first guest. Mark Fiorentino is a self-taught metaphysician who worked as an accomplished troubleshooter for tech companies like IBM and Harris Government Systems. He worked as a computer and electronics technician and developed many award-winning state-of-the-art software programs that solve problems concerning failure analysis for electronic assemblies and computer systems. Today, he's going to be discussing a model that he has been developing for a very long time called superrelativity, which is also the basis for his slipwave bias drive propulsion technology. So without any further ado, let's welcome Mark to today's event, and I will hand things over to him to get started.
Okay. Trying to share my screen. Share. Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you sound wonderful. Yeah, thank you again for joining us. And yeah, go ahead at any time, sir.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk today about the origin of mass, gravity, and inertia. Basically, they're all the same thing. There's little bits of tricks involved in getting one or the other to show up, but it's the same process, mechanically speaking. Let's go on to the next slide, which is a basic introduction to my book that describes the theory of superrelativity and more. Hopefully we'll get some video action here.
I didn't know what to expect when we started this interview, but I got to tell you, Mark, you're one of the best guests I've ever had the pleasure of having on. You've
Oh, thank you.
provided me with some incredible, and my viewers, some incredible information here.
Okay, so without any further delay, let's get into the main show. I'm going to read most of this stuff because these are the words I've chosen and I want to present, and I might interject a little extra at the bottom. The overall strategy concerning the theory of superrelativity is very sensible. I must complete Einstein's dream of a unified field theory. To accomplish this is a very challenging task. I use the evidence found in nature along with the correct interpretations, let's get that out of the way, given to us by the greatest physicists of all time. I use the same philosophy as Einstein. I followed his path. The Einstein approach, in which the geometrization of philosophy plays the main role in constructing the field equations of the theory. One of the principles of this philosophy is that laws of nature are just differential identities in the appropriate geometry. The theory of superrelativity provides a mechanical explanation for how our physical universe works. We have been searching for the theory of everything for over 400 years. Our physical reality, there's only one thing that physically exists. That thing is the ether. The ether is a quasi-elastic solid. It is the fundamental field. All things that we observe are simply different manifestations of this real physical object. All forces, energies, and particles are consubstantial with the ether. This means they are part of and the same within the ether. It is from this framework that I discovered the mechanical model that I call the theory of superrelativity. I searched for and found the origin of mass, inertia, and gravity. Once I came to understand how the gravitational field is created, the discovery of the anti-gravity field rapidly followed. If we want to understand how anti-gravity works, we first have to understand how gravity works. By going through this process, many other scientific breakthroughs were discovered. So I started with Einstein's unified field theory, which basically is this: electromagnetism and gravity emerge as aspects of a single fundamental field. The superrelativity version deconstructs the Einstein version of the unified field theory into three separate types, aspects that are unified via motion within space. The primary field of force is the electrostatic field, or the Coulomb force. This is how the universe is created from this basic torsion field, the Coulomb force. The secondary field of force is the magnetic field. This is happens whenever a motion of charge causes magnetism. You never get magnetism unless a charge moves. The other secondary field of force is the gravitational field. This is caused by the accelerated motion of particles. When that happens, the accelerated particles cause a contraction in and around the particle. I'll get into all of those things in more detail later on. But I just wanted to gear your thinking a little bit there, steer it into the right direction so you can imagine the things I'm going to say. The evidence for the existence of the ether is on the next slide. So let's just go to that. Okay, so I got a for and against column here. Let's go through these. The light is a transverse wave. Transverse waves only occur in solids. This is known by many physicists. Einstein was one of the first to bring this up. That's a clear indicator, since particles are transverse waves and they're all throughout space everywhere, we can pretty much say that that is a strong indicator that space is a solid. The speed of light is a finite velocity. If space were truly empty and made of nothing, the speed of light would be infinitely fast, and we never see this. The distance equals rate times formula. If you convert it algebraically and you try to solve, If space were made of nothing, you would wind up going infinitely fast, and that never happens. There's always a time interval involved because there's something out there. There's something real. There has to be in order to traverse that distance. If there was nothing there, it would take zero time. The ether has special properties of permittivity and permeability. Something that does not exist cannot have measurable properties. This has been a confirmed fact and measured that the space does have these properties. Therefore, there's something there. General relativity holds that gravity is a geometry. The spatial properties of permittivity and permeability determine the maximum velocity of light, which was discovered by James Clerk Maxwell, in which C equals 1 over the square root of permittivity times permeability. That is a vitally important equation, and it's going to come in play later on in this discussion. Gravity, mass, and inertia are all caused by a contraction of space. You can't bend something that does not exist. The forces of electrostatic charge and magnetism are also deformations of the ether plenum. They are different aspects of the fundamental field. Particles are persistent. This is only possible if the ether is a solid. And I offer this evidence from authoritative proof from Albert Einstein. According to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space and time, measuring rods and clocks, nor therefore any space-time intervals in the physical sense. The one and only thing that was used to disregard and discard the ether was the Michelson-Morley experiment, which failed to detect the ether wind. I thought about this for years to explain it, and then I suddenly realized the explanation was so simple. Super relativity explanation. The speed of light is constant relative to all other motion frames of reference. This happens because light speed is self-caused. This is what they did not know in the time when they did this experiment. They thought it would vary as the Earth moved through the ether. There would be an ether wind detectable. It's self-caused, which means its speed is dependent upon the internal structure and has nothing to do with the emitting source of the inertial frame of reference. Light speed is determined by its internal pressure gradient field. Therefore, the speed of light is independent from the velocity of the source and the observer. To give you an example, if you're standing in a train and it's going 100 miles an hour and you shoot a beam of light toward the wall in the same direction as the train is moving, the speed of light will not be 100 miles an hour plus the speed of light. It will be the speed of light. And if you turn around and go the other direction, it will not be 100 miles per hour minus, it will be the speed of light. And this is a known fact, and this is why the Michelson-Morley experiment failed to detect the ether wind. They did not know that light particles always traveled at this speed. So it was a problem in the design of the experiment. And unfortunately, it was misinterpreted to mean that the ether did not exist. These are the primary men that I used to guide me in my theory. Newton for his mechanics, Faraday's for his laws of induction, James Clerk Maxwell for the understanding of the ether and his electromagnetic theory, Hendrik Antoon Lorentz for his ether model, the quasi-elastic solid, and Albert Einstein for his work in special relativity and general relativity. Super relativity, definition of force. Force or action at a distance is caused by deformations within the ether medium. Stresses and tensions within the ether are the real and physical fields of force that we observe. These different types of deformations of space comprise the various aspects of the fundamental field. Basically, what I'm saying here is that magnetism, for example, is a specific bending of a continuous solid medium. And when I mean solid medium, I mean something which is continuous. The possible deformation types of the three-dimensional continuous medium. Negative charge is a clockwise rotation of space. Negative charge has lines of force moving inward toward the core of the charge. These things were determined as far back as Faraday. Positive charge is counterclockwise rotation of space. Positive charges have lines of force that move outward from the core of the charge. Then there's the stretching of space, that would be anti-gravity, and the contraction of space, and that, of course, would be gravity. These are the only real ways you can deform a three-dimensional object. And we know it's three-dimensional because of the inverse square law. If it were four-dimensional, it would be the inverse cubed law, but that's not what we see. It's definitely a three-dimensional space. Superrelativity and the primary forces. Now we're going to get into more detail about the charge, electrostatic charge, the magnetic field, gravitational and the anti-gravitational field. I'm going to characterize and I'm going to categorize things. Torsion field is the electrostatic part. It is a twist of space. The vortex structure of charges is the cause of autonomous particle velocity. The vortex particle structure creates a gradient pressure wave within all particles. That is the slip wave. It is the primary field. This field is indestructible and persistent. It's persistent because space is a solid. If it were a liquid or a gas, we would not be able to maintain particle structure. To give you an example, space is really a finite and unbounded. So if you have a rubber band, which is a finite unbounded system, and you wanted to put a particle in it, a twist of space, you could cut that rubber band, twist it, bond it back together, and you would have a particle that exists within that universe and is impossible to get rid of. You cannot unwind it because it's in an unbounded space. And that's the same thing that's happening in our realm. If there was an edge to space, if there was a finite property there, it would be possible to destroy particles and the universe would die. The magnetic field of force, it's a torsional reaction to moving charge. Space rotates within and around the moving charge as the charge moves. Space stretches because of the rotation. Spatial density and pressure decreases when this happens. Permittivity and permeability will also decrease. It's a secondary emergent force. That is the magnetic field. The gravitational field is a hyperbolic field. Space contracts as the result of an accelerated motion of unbalanced charges. It's a founding fundamental principle of the theory superrelativity. It's a secondary emergent force. It requires motion of particles. Anti-gravitational field of force is the inverse hyperbolic field. Space expands as a result of linear motion of balanced or unbalanced charges. It is a secondary emergent force. Okay. All right. Energy in motion equals mass. Energy is defined as the ability to do work. Work is done whenever a force is exerted over a distance. Force in any interaction that results in a change of motion of an object. A force has a magnitude and a direction which makes it a vector quantity. Newton's second law is a critically important clue. Einstein's E = mc squared in special relativity. Mass and energy are equivalent. In both formulas, mass is associated with a moving force or energy. There is a pattern to be recognized. This equation here, then this equation here. In each case, something is moving in order to create the mass, a force or an energy. The linking mechanism to mass generation is the motion of energy within space. The motion of magnetic force field will cause small electrostatic fields to move. This is a law of induction from Faraday. Superrelativity law of gravitation. The accelerated, this is very important. Whenever I say this, I think there should be a thunderclap happening somewhere. The accelerated motion of fundamental unbalanced electromagnetic charges will cause gravity, mass, to emerge as a field of force. It manifests as a gradient field of contraction. Space is made to contract in and around the particle according to the Ehrenfest paradox mechanism. I will explain that later on. Mechanical cause of mass, gravity, inertia. In each case, the causal nexus of the phenomena listed above is the same. The key linking factors come from the three of Einstein's discoveries, the equivalence principle. Somehow, gravity and accelerations are equivalent. Special relativity contraction of length as a result of increase in velocity relative to the ether. Special relativity's increase of mass as a result of increase in velocity relative to the ether. The rest mass of particles comes about as a result of uniform circular motion, which is the angular momentum. Whenever an unbalanced fundamental charge accelerates relative to the ether, the space in and around the particle continuously contracts. That's rest mass. The spherical contraction of the particles that have a so-called rest mass is the cause of the gravitational field. Inertia. This is one that really stymied everybody in physics for many, many years, including myself, but I finally was able to work it out. Inertia comes about because of a linear, uniform acceleration of motion. When a massive object is forced to accelerate, an inertial mass increase is caused by the act of the contraction of space in and around the accelerating object in the direction of motion. All of the object's particles contract in the direction of the accelerated motion, and their mass increases as a result of this additional contraction. This comes from special relativity. The electrostatic field of force. This is the path to the unification of the primary forces of nature. The electrostatic charge field is the autonomous particle motion is caused by a torsional field structure. All particles are vortex field structures. The electrostatic charge is a continuous vortex field. It exists within the ether and is consubstantial with the ether. Particles such as the electron cause within themselves a pressure wave gradient. This is the slip wave. The slip wave is the cause of perpetual motion of all particles. And what I will eventually do is reuse this design, this intelligent design, to create the slip wave spatial bias drive, so we can apply that technology of the particle to creating a warp drive. The magnetic field, once an electrostatic charge moves within the ether, the space in and around that particle is caused to rotate in response to the moving charge. The magnetic field is a torsional reaction to moving charge. Space simply rotates around the particle as the particle moves within space. Gravitational field, unbalanced fundamental charges such as the quarks move in a highly accelerated trefoil knot pattern. This trefoil knot is also rotating and forms into a dynamical geometry equivalent to 3 spinning disks. These spinning disks are rotating, and this spinning geometry can then be approximated into a rapidly precessing spinning sphere. Here's a little video that shows you how I see the electron, how it should really look like if you could see inside of one. The white dot here in the center is the front or the beginning of the rotation. So you can see as it proceeds toward the back, space separates and becomes wider, less dense, and that's basically how it looks if you could see inside of an electron or any particle. Now here we get into things that really are interesting. We get into the particle motion, which breathes life into the universe. The concept of kinematics is the greatest weakness in all of physics. Kinematics is the branch of mechanics concerned with the motion of objects without reference to the forces which cause the motion. This is a catastrophic weakness. And because we haven't studied the cause of particle motion, we really haven't advanced in physics. It's critical to know why particles move. And you can see here, this drawing is a drawing of an electron. And basically, I'm showing you how space is rotating more and more, and the external pressure increases. As we move toward the back end of the photon, you can see the arrows of pressure coming from outside are pushing this electron in this direction. As the degree of rotation increases, the spatial density decreases inside along this axis. So energy particles are energetic because they have an autonomous motion. Autonomous motion comes about as a result of particle structure. Force, action at a distance, comes about as a result of a particle to space interaction, and is not because of a particle to particle interaction. And to prove that, to back up how important this concept is, I get a quote from Einstein's unified field theory in 1930. In the last few sentences of that paper, he says this: I was able to show that the field equations yield equations in the first order approximation that correspond to the Newton-Poisson theory of gravitation and to Maxwell's theory of electromagnetic field. Nevertheless, I'm still far away from claiming the physical validity of the equations I derived. The reason for that is that I did not succeed in deriving equations of motion for particles yet. So he knew that it was important to figure out why and how particles move. Path toward unification, torsion field theory, the Coulomb force is the primary field. The motion of charges causes magnetism, as I have already gone over. The accelerated motion of unbalanced fundamental charges causes gravity. The pattern to be recognized. I remember the day I saw this after staring at this standard model here for every day and asking myself questions about, well, I wish you could see that better, but questions about why some particles have mass and others don't. All electromagnetic particles have mass except photons. This is my happiest thought. The fundamental balanced charges always move in a non-accelerated linear motion. Because of this special type of motion, they do not generate mass. Photons are the primary example. So from that idea, I built the theory of superrelativity because I realized that all other particles move because they have angular momentum and they are accelerating. And when they do that, they develop mass. The photon, the only one, is a balanced charge that moves in a straight line at a constant rate of speed. It's not accelerating, no mass. It's the equivalency principle come to life. The reason behind it, why gravity is the same as acceleration. All right, the pattern of clues that led to the discovery of the central cause of mass. I detected a pattern embedded in the standard model of fundamental particles and interactions. The clues that were linked together finally reveal the truth. Newton's second law, mass equals force divided by acceleration, Einstein's equation, mass equals speed of electrostatic charge there, and the speed of light. Lorentz's mass increase formula for special relativity also has a velocity of a charge at the speed of light, or a mass. According to the theory of relativity, gravitational mass is always the same as an inertial mass. However, when we speak of an object's mass increasing due to acceleration, we are really talking about its internal mass increase. The equivalency principle, a gravitational field is somehow equivalent to an accelerated frame of reference. Superrelativity's mass is created by the accelerated motion of unbalanced fundamental charges. When charges accelerate, they cause the space in and around the particle to contract. That contraction is what forms the gradient field of force that we call gravity. So now I've just explained why the equivalency principle is what it is. It requires accelerated motion, matching the acceleration listed in the equivalency principle to the gravitational field. When a particle accelerates, it creates the gravitational field. And now we have an explanation for the equivalence principle. This is of a monumental importance. Now I get to the final solution, a modified version of the moment of inertia. I use this in my paper that I'll put a link to at the end of this discussion that you could read. It's about a 50-page long thing with about 45 pages of explanation to the math that I used to solve for the mass of the neutrino. This was required in order to prove the unification of force from electromagnetism to gravity. And I do that with this formula and a system of equations in which I successfully calculate the mass of a neutron, and it can be done with a proton or electron or anything else. The solutions vary a little, technically speaking, but it can all be done. It works very well. And where did I get the idea for these for this equation, which is a rank 2 tensor, which, by the way, Einstein predicted would be the type of formula that would solve the problem. He was right again. I got this idea to use this formula and this method from Einstein, who actually got it from Paul Ehrenfest, the Ehrenfest paradox that I spoke about earlier, and here it is. Einstein followed a line of reasoning that began with his happiest thought of his life. Still at the Swiss Patent Office, he conducted one of his famous thought experiments. Einstein imagined a circle spinning in space. The center of the circle did not move, but its circumference was moving quickly in a circular direction. Einstein compared what happens in several reference frames, a standard tool he had used in developing the special relativity theory. He concluded, using his special relativity, that the boundary of the disk contracted as it spun. There was a force acting on the circle at the boundary, the centrifugal force, and its action was analogous to that of the gravitational force. The same contraction that affected the outer circle left the diameter unchanged. Thus, Einstein concluded in a way that surprised even him. The ratio of the circle to the diameter was no longer pi. He deduced, in the presence of a gravitational force or field, the geometry of space was non-Euclidean. It was no longer flat, it was bent, it was bending. And from this idea, he built the theory of general relativity, all upon this. And he kind of kept this to himself a lot, although he did write some papers on it. He realized that this was important, that this was the actual mechanism for particles to create mass and gravity. He worked this out. He just didn't know about the quarks inside of the neutron and proton. If he did, he would have solved it in that time. He died 10 years before the discovery of the quarks. He was just born too soon to solve the problem. Now I'm going to show you something vitally important. What actually is going on inside of the neutron and the proton. These are the things that I worked out in my mind, many sleepless nights, trying to see inside of them using my intuition and imagination. And then finally discovering the signature of God, which is the trefoil knot pattern that I'm going to show you here. These are the quarks moving about inside of the neutron and proton. This geometry supports both its binding mechanism and the force and generating the force of gravity. It's a perfect system. It does everything necessary to hold protons together for the entire life of the universe. They eventually spin so fast, they form, I've calculated this in another paper, at approximately 99% the speed of light. Now here again, I show it with the added dimension of motion of the rotation of the entire trefoil knot, because it's moving like this as well. Not only is it moving like this, but it's spinning and rolling. The end result will be a spherical rotation at near the speed of light. This spherical rotation is what I'm talking about in the Ehrenfest paradox. This is what's necessary to cause a contraction in this area all around the particle. So that's why the gravitational field is non-polarized. This mechanism accomplishes that. The neutron and proton are rapidly spinning spheres. We just saw it. There is a contraction of space that occurs at the perimeter of the rapidly rotating and processing neutron and proton spheres. The gravitational field is non-polarized. This is exactly matches what we see in nature. Neutrons and protons would have poles if they were not rolling and spinning at the same time. The key to understanding anti-gravity is first to understand gravity. I mean, that's what we're really here for. But I built all of this up so you can understand that gravity is nothing more than a contraction of space. So now that we know that, then we know that anti-gravity must be an expansion of space. The trick is, how do we get it to do that? Since we now know how to use motion for electromagnetic field to create a gravitational field, we must now figure out a way to reverse the process and cause an expansion of space by using the motion of the electromagnetic field. The mechanics of anti-gravity revealed. The electromechanical device that can be used to create an anti-gravity field is the electron. The key to getting the electron to make an anti-gravity field is to get it to move in a non-accelerated way. Normally, when an electron moves in an orbital, it has an angular momentum and therefore it is accelerating the entire time it moves within the orbital. In this case, the electron generates a small gravitational field. In order to make an electron generate an anti-gravity field, we must make the electron move in a linear, non-accelerated motion. This can easily be done by creating a current flow of electrons in a conductor. When a current flows within a conductor, the electrons follow the electrostatic lines of force created by the establishing a voltage. When the electrons move in this way, they only create a magnetic field. Michael Faraday established the laws of induction. Magnetism causes space to stretch. All that is needed to create an anti-gravity field is an intense magnetic field. A magnetic field occurs as a result of moving charge. A magnetic field is a torsional reaction to moving charge. There is a direct correspondence between the magnetic field and the anti-gravity. The stronger the magnetic field, the stronger the anti-gravity field becomes. Space is made to bend in the opposite direction. The anti-gravity field is an inverse hyperbolic field. When the magnetic field is put into motion or made to rotate, the anti-gravity effect is amplified. This is important. This is going to come into play in the experiment that I propose. The magnetic force in motion causes a very strong expansion of space. And that's just what we need to get our spaceships into other places and star systems. Additional benefits coming from the magnetic field. The magnetic field creates the anti-gravity field. The inverse hyperbolic field can be used to shield from the effects of gravity to build hovercrafts. A gradient magnetic field forms a gradient anti-gravity field, and this is what I call the slip wave. The slip wave is a pressure gradient field and can be used for propulsion. I believe it is the most common mode of propulsion used by UFOs. The intense magnetic field causes space to stretch, which causes a drop in spatial density. If you can imagine, since space is, I'm saying that magnetic field is a rotation of space. If you were to just put a piece of silly putty down onto a comic strip book and then lift it up and look at the image, twist that silly putty, you will see that this quasi-elastic solid stretches when you twist it. And I'm just saying the same thing is happening in this real thing called space, the ether. The drop in spatial density causes a corresponding drop in the permittivity and permeability of space. This is crucial. This is how we're going to break the light speed barrier. This allows a space vessel, which is inside of the slip wave, to travel beyond the speed of light by Maxwell's equation. It says that, it screams it. Now, I'm giving you the way to make it happen. The inverse hyperbolic field also cancels inertial effects. The people inside the slip wave bubble will float and be weightless, even when the spacecraft performs very high accelerations and direction changes. All of the Lorentz transformation effects are canceled. Time passes slightly faster inside of the slip wave. Okay, so this is the experiment that I propose. Please forgive me for the crude drawing. This spinning disc here of magnets is supposed to be flat underneath. Very similar to what Mark Sokol attempted a few weeks ago. And then you will see as the disc spins around and around, the motion of the magnetic field below the object with mass will cause a slight decrease in the gravitational pull below the object under question, under test. So what I propose now really is to, instead of using magnets in a spinning wheel, we use electromagnets permanently placed at each position and turn them on and off rapidly in a very rapid succession. So you have this kind of rotating movement of the magnetic field within this circular framework. And so there's three different configurations: an all North Pole, all South Pole, and all and varying north and south, which I think maybe the varying of north and south will give the strongest magnetic flux, the greatest amount. So I would try that first. And then you would turn them on together in pairs, 1, 1, 2, 3, all the way around, continuously as fast as you can. The faster you go, the more powerful the anti-gravity field will be. Now, I'm going to show you something that looks a little similar to Jack Safari's, I can't say his name, spacecraft, which is the cigar-shaped or the needle-shaped or whatever. And I wondered for years why they use this shape. And after going through the whole idea of using magnetism and realizing that you needed to put room temperature superconducting coils at these locations to create an ever stronger magnetic field, until you get to the last one, you got the strongest field. So you've got a direction of motion going like this. Here's the front of the ship, here's the back. It's literally slips through space, catapulted by the immense force of the magnetic field, which is causing space to expand at the back of the ship. And it's expanding here too, but not as much. There is no need to collapse space in front. This would be catastrophic if they actually did that. You won't see that in every instance that I've read about UFOs. I've always searched for any reference to magnetism, and I found it many, many times where people from the Air Force would go to landing sites and bring a magnometer. Well, why were they bringing a magnometer? Because they were going to look for magnetic fields. They knew something already. If they knew to bring that to a UFO landing site, they knew that UFOs generate very strong magnetic fields. And in some cases, they were able to take samples of grass where the UFO had landed and measured it and saw that the grass itself was magnetized. This is clear indication that they're using intense magnetic fields. In other circumstances, physicists were known to have observed a UFO and had a polarized lens. He looked at it and he saw that the light coming off of the UFO was polarized. And this is a typical case of when light passes through a magnetic field. Faraday discovered this centuries ago. Time and time again, you find instances and examples of people who, in many cases, physicists, who have indeed discovered that magnetism, high intense magnetic fields, are associated with UFOs. Now, metamaterials keeps coming up along with UFOs too, and I explained why they would like to use and need to use metamaterials in the craft outer exterior. Basically, it's because in metamaterials, you can drop the permittivity and permeability within the material. This means that this thing will slide through space with almost no inertial resistance. And that's to the big advantage of a spacecraft. They have developed a material that has a refractive index of 0. The phase velocity has been declared as infinitely fast. This backs up what I'm saying. If you drop permittivity and permeability, you can go any speed you want. You can go at the speed of a god if you need to. All you have to do is control space, bias it by reducing permittivity and permeability. Some physicists have described this effect as an optical effect due to the geometry of the structure within the metamaterial. Permittivity and permeability have been reduced to 0, so this means that there is no impedance to motion of a photon within the metamaterial. Clearly, Maxwell's formula says that if you reduce permittivity and permeability to 0, light will move infinitely fast. And that is what I believe they have done concerning metamaterials. According to the theory of superrelativity, space can be biased in such a way so that permittivity and permeability can be reduced to whatever value desired. It's a metaphysical theory I have. The theory of superrelativity is a philosophy of existence that relies upon intelligent design theory. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, including abstract concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. I am concerned with the fundamental nature of reality and being, which includes ontology, cosmology, and epistemology. Superrelativity bridges the gap between objective reality and what we would call things that are abstract. So this means that our objective reality is manifest as a result of the act of creation coming from the Creator or God. All of this three-dimensional world is within God. There is nothing outside of God. Everything within this physical universe has to correspond to laws, and God set those laws. They are immutable as God is immutable. None of this, what we see and experience, is an accident. It is all intentioned by God. I believe that people who research things at the foundation of reality, which are things like gravity and antigravity, are on more than a scientific quest for truth. It's a spiritual quest. Einstein once said, "I want to know how God created this world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomena, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are just details." What I have discovered is the details are God's thoughts. The ultimate goal of modern day physics should be to develop a perfect understanding of the laws of nature. When we achieve this, we will have arrived at the theory of everything. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Albert Einstein. And now we're ready for questions.